Welcome to Infinity. This presentation offers an in-depth exploration of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, extending beyond a singular definition to examine its various manifestations. We will analyze the distinct variants of narcissism, the manipulative tactics employed by individuals with these traits, the profound psychological consequences experienced by victims of narcissistic abuse, and the observable signs that indicate such abuse has occurred. The aim is to provide a thorough understanding of this complex disorder and its impact, ultimately fostering greater awareness and support for those affected. I would also like to acknowledge that the research compiled for this presentation was collected by Infinity and team. This presentation is structured to provide a comprehensive understanding of narcissism. First, we will establish a foundational understanding of narcissistic personality disorder as defined by key diagnostic criteria. We will then move to an examination of the spectrum of narcissism, detailing its key variants and how they differ. Following this, we will analyze the manipulative tactics that narcissists utilize, comparing and contrasting their employment across the variants. A critical section will be dedicated to the enduring psychological wounds inflicted on victims of narcissistic abuse, followed by a discussion of the observable signs that can help identify individuals who have experienced such abuse. Finally, we will conclude by synthesizing our understanding of narcissism and emphasizing strategies for supporting survivors. Our exploration begins with an introduction to narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. At its core, NPD is a complex mental health condition distinguished by a persistent and pervasive pattern of grandiosity, meaning an exaggerated sense of self-importance, an unremitting need for admiration and validation from others, and a profound lack of empathy, which is the inability or unwillingness to understand or share the feelings of others. It's crucial to note that these defining features are not transient, but rather consistently manifest across various personal and professional settings, typically emerging by early adulthood. The ramifications of NPD are significant, extending beyond the individual diagnosed with the disorder to cause substantial distress and impair the well-being of those within their interpersonal sphere. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, or DSM-5, provides the standardized criteria used by clinicians to diagnose NPD. These criteria include a grandiose sense of self-importance, characterized by an exaggeration of achievements and talents, and an expectation of superiority, even in the absence of commensurate accomplishments. A preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. The belief that they are special and unique and therefore should only associate with or be understood by other special or high-status individuals or institutions. A requirement for excessive admiration coupled with a strong sense of entitlement, manifesting as an unreasonable expectation of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with their expectations. Exploitative behavior within interpersonal relationships, wherein they take advantage of others to achieve their own objectives. A lack of empathy, demonstrated by an unwillingness or inability to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. And finally, a propensity for envy of others or the belief that others are envious of them, often accompanied by arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. It is important to acknowledge that, despite these clearly defined criteria, the diagnosis of NPD continues to be a subject of controversy within the psychiatric community. This controversy stems from concerns regarding the potential for stigmatization associated with the diagnosis and the inherent complexity of the disorder, which can make it challenging to accurately assess and treat. The traits associated with NPD exert a pervasive influence on an individual's behavior and interactions. Individuals with NPD are commonly characterized as arrogant, displaying an exaggerated sense of self-importance, self-centered, with a primary focus on their own needs and desires. Manipulative, employing various tactics to control or exploit others. And demanding, with unreasonable expectations of compliance and entitlement. These traits frequently create significant challenges within their interpersonal relationships, which are often marked by a tendency to seek out associations with individuals or institutions they perceive as unique, powerful, or high status in order to bolster their own sense of self-worth. This pronounced need for external validation underscores a key dynamic of NPD. The deep-seated investment in a grandiose self-image functions as a defense mechanism, shielding the individual from underlying feelings of insecurity, vulnerability, and shame. Consequently, the treatment of NPD presents unique obstacles, primarily due to the individual's inherent reluctance to engage with dissenting viewpoints or participate in the process of self-reflection, both of which are essential for therapeutic progress. While the precise etiology of NPD remains a subject of ongoing research, current understanding suggests that its development is likely influenced by a complex interplay of factors. It is widely believed that adverse childhood experiences such as emotional neglect, abuse, or significant trauma can play a crucial role in the development of narcissistic personality patterns. These early experiences can disrupt healthy psychological development and contribute to the formation of maladaptive coping mechanisms. In addition to environmental factors, there is also emerging evidence to suggest that genetically driven differences in emotional processing may contribute to an individual's predisposition to developing NPD. These genetic factors may influence temperament, emotional regulation, and other neurobiological processes that underlie personality development. Having established a foundational understanding of NPD, we now turn our attention to the spectrum of narcissism, recognizing that it is not a monolithic entity, but rather encompasses a range of variants with distinct characteristics. We begin with grandiose narcissism, also referred to as overt narcissism. This variant is characterized by an unrealistic and pervasive sense of superiority, meaning an inflated view of one's own abilities and importance, a pronounced tendency towards extroversion, with a desire to be the center of attention, and an unremitting need for admiration and praise from others to validate their inflated self-image. The behavioral patterns associated with grandiose narcissism are often conspicuous and readily observable, frequently including boasting about achievements, exaggerating talents or accomplishments, and engaging in attention-seeking behaviors. Individuals with grandiose narcissism typically dominate social interactions, asserting control and seeking to be the leader or central figure, and they actively seek affiliation with high-status individuals or institutions, believing that such associations enhance their own prestige. Furthermore, they commonly exploit others to maintain their inflated self-image, using manipulation and taking advantage of others without regard for their feelings or needs. And they may resort to intimidation, aggression, or other coercive tactics when they perceive a threat to their sense of superiority or control. In contrast to the overt grandiosity of grandiose narcissism, vulnerable narcissism, also known as covert narcissism, presents with a more subtle and less readily apparent demeanor. This variant is characterized by a tendency towards introversion, meaning a preference for solitude or smaller social circles, a pronounced hypersensitivity to criticism, where even minor negative feedback can trigger intense emotional reactions, and a heightened sense of insecurity, often masked by a facade of arrogance or aloofness. Individuals with vulnerable narcissism often appear modest or unassuming, but internally they harbor grandiose expectations of superiority and believe they deserve special treatment. They may engage in self-pity, portraying themselves as victims or martyrs to elicit sympathy and attention, and they frequently exhibit manipulative behavior in indirect ways, such as through passive-aggressive tactics, emotional blackmail, or subtle forms of control. Communal narcissism represents another distinct variant within the spectrum of narcissism. This form is characterized by individuals who project an image of being exceptionally caring, compassionate, and altruistic. However, Unlike genuine altruism, this outward display of concern for others is primarily driven by an underlying need for validation and admiration. Communal narcissists frequently engage in virtue signaling, which involves publicly expressing moral values or good deeds primarily to enhance their own social standing and gain praise from others. They may also employ manipulative tactics to ensure they receive recognition for their selfless acts, such as exaggerating their contributions, taking credit for the work of others, or creating situations where they appear to be the rescuer or savior. Malignant narcissism represents a particularly destructive and severe form within the narcissistic spectrum. This variant is characterized by a combination of narcissistic traits and antisocial behaviors, resulting in a particularly harmful and damaging personality structure. Key features of malignant narcissism include aggression, encompassing both verbal and physical forms, sadism, which is the tendency to derive pleasure from inflicting pain or suffering on others, and an intense need for power and control over others, often achieved through coercive or manipulative means. Individuals with malignant narcissism are highly skilled at employing various manipulative tactics to exploit and control others. They can be charming and charismatic when it serves their purposes, but they are also capable of extreme vindictiveness and cruelty when their sense of superiority or control is threatened or challenged. Finally, we consider high-functioning narcissism, sometimes referred to as exhibitionist narcissism. This variant describes individuals who, on the surface, present an image of success, competence, and achievement. They may hold prestigious positions, accumulate wealth, or demonstrate exceptional talents. However, beneath this veneer of success lie significant narcissistic traits. While these individuals may not meet all the diagnostic criteria outlined in the DSM-5 for a full diagnosis of NPD, they still exhibit problematic characteristics such as a pervasive sense of entitlement, believing they deserve special treatment and privileges, and a marked lack of empathy, demonstrating an inability or unwillingness to consider the feelings and needs of others. Their narcissistic traits, though often subtle, can still cause considerable harm in their relationships and professional interactions. Continuing our analysis of the narcissist's toolkit, we find a range of manipulative tactics employed across the narcissistic spectrum. These tactics are designed to exert control, maintain power, and exploit others, often leaving victims confused, emotionally scarred, and struggling to understand what has happened to them. Gaslighting involves the distortion of the victim's sense of reality, causing them to doubt their own perceptions, memories, and sanity. Love bombing is characterized by an initial phase of intense affection, attention, and flattery at the beginning of a relationship, used to quickly gain the victim's trust and dependence. Triangulation occurs when the narcissist involves a third party in their relationship dynamic, often to manipulate the victim, create jealousy, or gain leverage. Projection is a defense mechanism where the narcissist attributes their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or behaviors onto the victim, deflecting responsibility and blame. Playing the victim involves the narcissist portraying themselves as wronged, injured, or oppressed to elicit sympathy, gain attention, and evade accountability for their actions. Hoovering refers to attempts by the narcissist to draw a former victim back into the relationship after a period of separation, often using tactics such as false promises, guilt trips, or expressions of remorse. The silent treatment is used as a form of punishment and control, where the narcissist ignores the victim, refuses to communicate, and withholds affection to induce anxiety, fear, and compliance. Smear campaigns involve spreading lies, rumors, or negative information about the victim to damage their reputation, isolate them from support networks, and undermine their credibility. Devaluation and demeaning consist of systematic criticism, insults, put-downs, and belittling comments aimed at eroding the victim's self-worth and self-esteem. Boundary violations involve the narcissist's disregard for the victim's personal limits, privacy, and autonomy, often intruding on their physical space, possessions, or emotional boundaries. Finally, exploitation is the overarching pattern of taking advantage of others without any regard for their feelings, needs, or well-being, using them as a means to an end to achieve the narcissist's own goals. While the manipulative tactics we've discussed are common across the narcissistic spectrum, there are some notable distinctions in how different subtypes tend to employ them. Grandiose narcissists, with their overt sense of superiority and need for control, often utilize overt aggression and intimidation as primary tools of manipulation. This can include verbal abuse, threats, and attempts to dominate through displays of power. Vulnerable narcissists, in contrast, tend to lean towards more passive-aggressive tactics. They may use subtle forms of manipulation such as guilt-tripping, emotional blackmail, and withholding affection to control others while avoiding direct confrontation. Communal narcissists, as we've discussed, focus on their image of altruism and helpfulness. Their manipulative tactics often involve exploiting the goodwill of others, exaggerating their contributions, and seeking constant praise and recognition for their selfless acts. Finally, malignant narcissists, with their combination of narcissism and antisocial traits, resort to aggressive and destructive tactics that reflect their disregard for others' well-being. This can include sadistic behavior, calculated cruelty, and a willingness to inflict both emotional and physical pain to achieve their goals. This slide visually represents the power imbalance and emotional distress inherent in narcissistic abuse. We now turn to the profound psychological impact of this abuse on its victims. The terms narcissistic victim syndrome or narcissistic abuse syndrome are often used to describe the constellation of symptoms experienced by those who have been subjected to prolonged emotional abuse by narcissists. While these syndromes are not yet formally recognized in diagnostic manuals like the DSM-5, they highlight a very real and devastating pattern of psychological harm. Survivors of narcissistic abuse frequently grapple with profound self-doubt, questioning their own sanity and worth. Debilitating anxiety, often characterized by hypervigilance and fear. Pervasive depression, marked by feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and loss of interest in life. And a shattered sense of reality, struggling to reconcile their experiences with their previous understanding of relationships and trust. The chronic and insidious nature of narcissistic abuse can lead to the development of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or the CPTSD. Unlike traditional PTSD, which typically stems from a single traumatic event, CPTSD arises from prolonged and repeated trauma, often within the context of a controlling relationship. This ongoing abuse can have severe and long-lasting consequences, including significant difficulties with emotion regulation, making it challenging to manage intense feelings and leading to emotional outbursts or suppression. Disturbances in one's sense of identity, causing confusion about self-worth, values, and boundaries, and profound difficulties in forming and maintaining healthy relationships due to ingrained patterns of distrust, fear, and unhealthy attachment styles. Codependency is a relational pattern that frequently develops within narcissistic relationships, further complicating the dynamics and hindering healing. Codependency is characterized by an excessive and often compulsive focus on meeting the narcissist's needs, often at the expense of one's own well-being. This pattern can stem from learned behaviors acquired in past dysfunctional family dynamics, where caretaking and self-sacrifice were necessary for survival or approval. In a narcissistic relationship, codependent individuals may become enmeshed, enabling the narcissist's behavior while neglecting their own emotional, physical, and psychological needs. Beyond the more complex conditions like CPTSD and codependency, victims of narcissistic abuse frequently experience other prevalent psychological sequelae, including debilitating anxiety, characterized by excessive worry, fear, and physiological symptoms such as panic attacks. Pervasive depression, marked by persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, loss of interest in activities, and changes in appetite or sleep. Significantly diminished self-worth and self-esteem, resulting from the narcissist's continuous manipulation, criticism, and emotional invalidation, leading to feelings of inadequacy, shame, and self-blame. It is crucial to be able to recognize the signs that someone may be suffering from the aftermath of narcissistic abuse. These signs can manifest in various ways, impacting different aspects of their lives. We'll begin by examining changes in social behavior and interpersonal dynamics. Social withdrawal and isolation are common, as victims may withdraw from social circles, isolate themselves from friends and family, and avoid social interactions due to fear, shame, or a desire to protect themselves from further harm. A profound difficulty in trusting others often develops post-abuse, as the betrayal and manipulation experienced can shatter the victim's ability to form healthy and trusting relationships. Victims may appear constantly on edge or hypervigilant, exhibiting noticeable tension, anxiety, and a heightened state of alertness in social situations, stemming from chronic stress and fear of triggering past trauma. Disturbingly, there's a tendency for victims to repeat unhealthy relationship patterns, often being drawn to relationships that echo the dynamics of past abuse due to familiarity or unresolved trauma. Fawning or appeasement behaviors may emerge, where victims excessively cater to others' needs, prioritize their approval, and suppress their own feelings and desires to avoid conflict or rejection. Finally, victims often struggle with trouble setting and maintaining boundaries, having difficulty establishing a healthy sense of personal limits, asserting their needs, and protecting themselves from further exploitation. Emotional distress and dysregulation are also common and can manifest in a variety of ways. Visible low self-esteem is frequently observed, with victims displaying poor self-worth, negative self-talk, and a pervasive sense of inadequacy. Depressive symptoms are common, including frequent sadness, persistent feelings of hopelessness, loss of interest in previously enjoyed activities, changes in appetite or sleep, and fatigue. Victims may experience mood swings or heightened emotional reactivity, exhibiting difficulty with emotional regulation, intense emotional outbursts, or rapid shifts in mood. Anxiety and fearfulness are often present, with observable signs of anxiety such as restlessness, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and physical symptoms like increased heart rate or sweating, stemming from the trauma of abuse. Some victims may exhibit emotional numbness or a flat affect, appearing detached, unresponsive, or emotionally blunted as a coping mechanism to deal with overwhelming pain. Finally, confusion and difficulty concentrating are common, with victims experiencing mental fog, memory problems, and impaired cognitive function due to the chronic stress and manipulation tactics employed by the abuser. In addition to emotional and social changes, narcissistic abuse can also lead to significant behavioral changes and alterations in self-perception. Victims often experience difficulty making decisions, exhibiting indecisiveness, second-guessing themselves, and a lack of confidence in their judgment. Pervasive self-blame is common, with a tendency to wrongfully assume responsibility for the abuser's behavior, internalizing the blame and believing they are somehow at fault. Unexplained physical symptoms may arise, with victims experiencing various physical ailments without clear medical causes, such as chronic pain, fatigue, digestive issues, or headaches, often linked to the chronic stress of abuse. Changes in appearance or self-care may be evident, with a decline in personal hygiene, grooming, or overall self-care, reflecting the victim's diminished self-worth and emotional exhaustion. There may be a loss of interest in hobbies and activities that once provided joy, with victims withdrawing from activities and passions that previously gave them pleasure and meaning. Victims may engage in walking on eggshells behavior, exhibiting constant cautiousness, hyper-alertness, and a need to carefully monitor their words and actions to avoid upsetting the abuser or triggering further abuse. Finally, victims may experience a giving up of their sense of self or identity, losing their individuality and appearing to mirror the abuser's personality, interests, and beliefs as a survival mechanism. In conclusion, this presentation has sought to illuminate the complexities of narcissism and its profound impact. Understanding the intricacies of narcissism, including its various forms and the spectrum it encompasses, is paramount in effectively recognizing the devastating impact of narcissistic abuse on victims. The process of healing from narcissistic abuse is multifaceted and requires a comprehensive approach, involving both psychological recovery from trauma and the challenging work of re-establishing personal identities that have often been distorted or suppressed by narcissistic dynamics. The detailed exploration of NPD variations provides crucial insights into the underlying mechanisms and behaviors of narcissistic abusers, as well as a deeper understanding of the specific psychological wounds experienced by survivors. Finally, it is absolutely critical for mental health practitioners, support systems, and society as a whole to provide understanding, validation, and adequate support to those affected by narcissistic abuse, fostering an environment of empathy, empowerment, and healing.